Hello and welcome back to the Old Soul Millennial channel. In today's video I would like to provide an instructional video with insight as to how to perform a bore cut or a plunge cut with a chainsaw. Now, to somebody that's never performed a plunge cut before, the process of a bore cut or a plunge cut can definitely seem a bit intimidating or scary, especially if you've ever experienced kickback before. I'm going to try and provide as much insight as possible to hopefully get you feeling comfortable and confident to attempt this on your own. Of course, don't rush the process, but I'm just going to share this insight with you and take it for what it is. So, what are some common situations in which I would use a bore cut? Well, I would use a bore cut when I'm conducting a more advanced felling technique, or sometimes I'll use a bore cut when I'm bucking up a log. Say you have a log and it's propped on two objects. There's a lot of downward force in the middle of that log. Sometimes I would take a bore cut, bore through the center of the log, cut down, and then go up, right? Because if you were to cut right from the top, as you near the bottom of that log, that kerf is going to close up and it will pinch your bar. So there's a lot of instances where a bore cut or a plunge cut becomes very handy. Once you learn and master this technique, you're going to find yourself using it all over the place. Now, before we get into the actual technique, there's a few things I want to go over. For one, anytime you grab your chainsaw, throw your safety gear on. Your chaps, eye protection, hearing protection, gloves, safety toe, boots, hard hat, face shield, a good idea as well. Aside from that, you want to ensure that your chain is tensioned properly, right? We're going to be boring through the center of this log. We don't want to have a loose chain because that could increase binding and just make it more dangerous. So if anything, you want your chain a little bit tighter, definitely not a little bit looser. Technique I like to use to check my chain tension, I'll pinch on the chain, lift it up, and those little triangles should just about come to the top of the bar. That's where I like to set my chain tension. Aside from that, if you've ever filed your chainsaw before, I've covered this in past videos, you'll know that there are cutter teeth, as well as in front of the cutter teeth there are rakers or depth gauges. It's important to file down those depth gauges as you file down your cutter teeth. In fact, there are guides to control how much material you remove off those depth gauges. A lot of more experienced chainsaw guys out there, including myself, like to file those rakers down a little bit further than where the depth gauge will limit them to be filed to. What that does is it allows the cutter teeth to remove more wood, but at the same time, it makes the saw a bit more jerky. And you do not want a jerky saw when you're bore cutting. So, my advice for you, stick with the depth gauge filing tool and be careful not to overfile your depth gauges, because when you go to bore cut, it's going to be jerky, uncomfortable, and a lot harder to control. So next, we need to talk about the kickback zone on the bar. So I've tried to highlight the kickback zone on the bar in red. So this upper front corner of the bar highlighted in red is the kickback zone, and when we're doing a bore cut, we want to avoid this area. In fact, you always want to avoid tapping this area on any wood, because as the chain is spinning forward, if it were to make contact with the piece of wood, with that chain spinning forward, it will in fact cause the bar to kick up or kick back. So you want to be very careful to avoid this area. Where we are going to start our bore cut is in the lower front corner of the bar, highlighted in green. So I'm going to zoom the camera out, kind of give you a rough demonstration of what we're going to do. So if I want to bore cut right here, starting in that green area, I'm going to approach the tree at about a 45-degree angle. And then as this bar starts to cut in the wood, I'm going to gradually straighten out the bar as to where it's in position going straight into the tree, and then I'm just going to push forward. So as you can see, with a little bit of practice, really anybody can complete a bore cut. A few closing thoughts though. In terms of throttle, you want to keep your throttle high. You want to keep the RPMs up. You don't want to have your saw at half throttle. It really makes the plunge cut a much smoother operation when you have your saw running at full RPM. You know, you want to try and do everything in one fluent motion. Start at that 45-degree angle, straighten out the bar as the bar starts to cut in, and then just a little bit of forward pressure. You know, you don't want to push the saw harder than it can cut. But again, you want to keep some forward pressure on the tip of that bar to ensure that you're boring in and just not cutting the stump. Another thing I wanted to point out, you may have noticed in the video that there was an instance or two in which the saw became a bit jerky. Now that may be happening for two reasons. One, I file my rakers down a little bit more than what the standard raker depth gauge tool typically allows for, which, as noted earlier, that's going to make the saw more jerky, but it's going to give you bigger chips. So that could be one cause of the increased vibration and jerkiness of my saw. But more likely, this is a dead stump. And for the most part, as wood dries, it gets harder. This stump's been here for maybe a year and a half. So I'd imagine probably when I started to experience some of that jerkiness, maybe I was hitting a really dry, hard, dead spot in this stump, and that was causing some of that jerky vibration. For the most part, when you're dealing with a tree that's alive and green, it's going to be a very smooth operation. Or when you're dealing with softwoods, you know, this is a hardwood ash stump, and once it dries up, it gets very hard. So with that, I'd like to conclude today's video. Thank you for watching. Any questions or comments, feel free to let me know in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.